Welcome to the saloon. In this series, we're going to talk about all kinds of experiences I've had with musicians that, I knew when I was younger, experiences I had with those musicians, and lots of other great stories. So I guess the place we should start at is Barry Harris. When I was about, I guess I was 23, I made this crazy decision to move out to Wichita, Kansas. And I admit there was a girl involved. And the next thing I know, I found myself at the Greyhound bus station with 2 guitars in tow and a suitcase full of clothes. And there's an 18-year-old girl getting ready to board and go out to the Midwest for God knows what. We stayed in Nebraska for about, 2 months. It was a frozen wasteland. There was nothing to do there. And then we moved to Wichita, Kansas. Well, the first thing I did when I got to Wichita was try to find places to play music. And I looked around the phone book. And that's what you did back in those days. You didn't, this was early 2000s. And in fact, it would have been, I guess, 2001. And so, if you wanted to find anything back then, what'd you do? You flipped open the book to the real Yellow Pages. So I went to the Yellow Pages and I would just start looking for bar after bar after bar to play, make a notebook of it, and then start calling those places and trying to book gigs. Well, I played this place in Derby, Kansas. I lived in Wichita. Played this place one night in Derby, Kansas. Now, Derby was just a little redneck podunk town in the middle of nowhere. And I was playing a place there one night. I can't remember what the place was called. Doesn't matter. But I had heard about this guy named Barry Harris. And he was like a local blues guy in town. I guess around that time he would have been in his 70s. And I went over and was playing at this gig. Well, next door to this gig where I was playing was where Barry was playing that night with his band. And he was also playing with a fiddle player that I had met in town named Julian Mayfair. We'll have some more about him in later episodes of this series. Probably have a series episode devoted strictly to him. But anyway, Barry was playing next door to this joint where I was playing. So it had always kind of, growing up, listening to these old records and stuff, I would check out blues records at the public library about, I found out that they had all these chess records, Meteor records, and Elmore James, Robert Nighthawk, anybody you could hope to listen to. So that's what I was listening to around the time I was, 14, 15, 16. So, listening to all these real deal blues guys, my dream, of course, was to meet one and hang out with them and just, absorb it. Well, that was kind of what my mission was when I walked over on the break that night from my gig to Barry Harris's gig, who was playing next door. I thought this guy might be pretty accessible. And so I walked in and it hit me right away. Barry was playing with his band and had Julian playing fiddle. And it was just, I'd never seen anything like that except maybe 2 years before at this place called Freddy's Armadillo in Charlotte when I saw Clarence Gatemouth Brown in this little club. And man, that was a trip. I was tricked into getting his autograph that night by a drummer. That it was an older guy. And man, I sat down and got Gatemouth's autograph, and I said, I didn't know what to say to him. I was sitting right there at a booth before the show. Gatemouth right here and me sitting right here. And I'd seen him with Eric Clapton, opened up for Eric Clapton a year before. And so I'm sitting there and getting this autograph, and I'm thinking, well, what do you say to Gatemouth Brown, And like a big dummy, I said, yeah, Mr. Gatemouth. I said, I saw you open for Eric Clapton last year. And he signed the thing, pushed it over to me. He said, get the fuck out of here. So anyway, back to the story. So I go next door and there's Barry Harris. And he's wailing it out, playing some real deal blues. I mean, the real stuff. Julian's playing fiddle. So I sit there and take this in so long that I'm about late getting back to my gig. But I went back to the gig, played, a quick set as quick as I could, and then just jumped back over to the club next door. I mean, it was like something out of a movie or something. But anyway, got next door and happened that Barry was on break. So I came up, I introduced myself to him, and made the mistake to not introduce myself like I did to Gatemouth Brown and say, hey, I saw you open for such and such last year. But anyway, we just hit it off just right off the bat. There was just something there that we just hit it off. I told him, that I was a new musician in town. I was into blues and played blues and everything like that. And the next thing I know, he says, great. Hey, would you mind running across the street to that store over there and get me a box of Blackstone cherry cigars? And he didn't even give me any money. And so I said, yes, of course I will. And I ran across the street and got the cigars and brought them back to him. And he said, thank you, son. And it was kind of ironic that he called me son, because that's basically what I became to him. And he became a dad to me, a second father. And Barry's no longer with us. He lived on to the age of about, I think, 90 or 91 and passed a couple of years ago. But next day, at that show, he gave me his phone number. And he said, call me tomorrow. So I did. Next day, I couldn't wait until about 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock. Picked up the phone and called him, and he answered the phone. Hello, Mr. Barry. And I'm going to do his voice several times throughout this, because from the countless amount of hours I spent with this man, I'm pretty good at imitating voices anyway. I do a lot of acting and filmmaking and stuff. So I'm good at just that anyway. But I was able to always emulate Barry. And so the next day I called him, and he asked me to come over to his house. So I go over to his house, we start hanging out, and it just developed into a friendship that I could never ever expected what would happen. But Barry was a guy, I'll tell you a little bit about him. He grew up and he was from Choctaw, Oklahoma. He told me that he grew up on dirt floors. That's how poor that he was. His mama was especially hard on him. She beat the hell out of him a lot of times. Beat him so bad that by the time he could get out of there, he went and joined the army. And he went over and spent time in Japan and fought during the war. And it was just wild, the stories that he would tell and stuff. But when he got out of the army, he came back. And after he was stationed in Japan, came back to the States, got a job out at Boeing Aircraft, which is, Wichita, Kansas is air capital of the United States. And so he stayed out there for a while. But it's so funny because his first musical experience, he learned from these guys at these old gambling joints, basically like little juke joints and stuff. And he started out, a man named Mr. Crump, I think is who he said, was one of his teachers, a guy named Mr. Crump. And I can't remember the other guys. I got a big book at home that Barry gave me. I mean, it's like this big. It has everything, all of his musical history in it. I'll bring it for another episode because this is in the first episode that I'll do about Barry Harris. But anyway, he was taught by these old guys at these gambling joints how to play guitar. That's what they do. They sit around and gamble and, play their guitars and everything. And like the first songs he learned were songs like Take Me Back. So anyway, these old kind of country blues songs. He said he only knew like, I think maybe 3 or 4 songs on the guitar when he joined an orchestra out of Oklahoma, I think it was. And Barry said, that when he joined this thing, Honky Tonk was the other song that he knew. Honky Tonk. He played 2 songs for him. I think he played Kansas City and Honky Tonk. Might not have been Kansas City, but he played the only 2 songs that he knew at that time that were band arrangements. He played those and got in the orchestra. And Barry told me that the whole time he was in this orchestra, he would just turn his guitar down and fake like he was playing and get paid for the gigs. Until later, I guess the band leader did figure out that, what he was up to and he got fired. But Barry spent time after that as a comedian. He would go and do stand-up comedy. One of the funniest things in the world was to do a gig with Barry. And as we were breaking down, he'd get up on the microphone, especially if he had a little bit of whiskey in him, and start telling jokes. It was hilarious. So anyway, Barry eventually put together what he called the 9th Street Band. And it featured many people during the time of it. But one of the constants was a guy named Ray Valentine. He was a piano player, a very, very quiet, reserved gentleman type, always very well dressed, and just a fantastic old school piano player. And that's who Barry always had kind of as his sideman. And he was always there with Ray Valentine. But I had so many colorful experiences with Barry, and I'll just highlight on some of them here. I would spend maybe 3 or 4 days of the week at his house. I would just go over every day about 7 o'clock or so, and we'd sit around and drink liquor. Drink wine. I'd drink beer, I'd drink some of his wine, and smoke reefer. And Barry could smoke reefer like nobody's business. And it was hilarious because he would use these Tops papers that were like basically, meant to roll cigarettes. He'd roll one up in those, this Tops paper, taste horrible, and then he'd roll it again in another Tops paper. So it was like a double insulated reefer stick. But anyway, Barry was a hoot. I would go over there and he would tell me so many stories and show me so many things on guitar. His band was called the 9th Street Band, and that was because there was a couple bars on 9th Street, which is close to where he lived, in the black community. And they're all only black folks went to the bars, at these bars, and all black bars pretty much. And this is where Barry, played. This was his stomping ground, was the 9th Street Club. And that 9th Street Club, it was around for a long time. In fact, it went under many different names, I think, until it was named the 9th Street Club again eventually. But Barry, that's where Barry got his band name from. And that little bar that was 9th Street, it was wild because back in the 70s, Barry said, Albert Collins came through there. Freddie King came through there because, a lot of these guys were Texas guys. So Wichita was, it wasn't far off the beaten path for them to come through. And Barry said that, he would sit there sometimes, and Freddie King on more than one occasion would come to his house and play cards and drink until the wee hours of the morning. And I would go, sitting right here on this couch, yeah, the same couch that we're sitting on right now. Freddie King was sitting right there. We were playing poker or whatever they were playing. Absolutely wild. And Barry also wrote a song for Buddy Guy. It's called "I Got a Problem," and you may be familiar with it. Although he did not get credit for it. The credit goes to a guy named Jesse Anderson, who was a good friend of Barry's and somebody I'll also talk about. He was another old school blues man that lived in Wichita. Barry and Jesse were great friends, but when Jesse went out to Chicago when they were young, he asked Barry if he could use the song and record it, but he never asked Barry if he could sell the song to Buddy Guy. And, it's funny, when I opened up for Buddy Guy, Barry had me promise him that I would tell Buddy Guy that Barry Harris wrote that song and not Jesse Anderson. And if you look up, I've got a problem. I got a problem with my woman, got a problem with my wife. You will look up and see that the writer is credited to Jesse Anderson. So anyway, I did see Buddy Guy and we hung out, and I made sure that he was very friendly to us, me and my bass player, Jesse Major, very friendly to us and everything. And so that's why I made sure to tell him right before he went on stage, hey, by the way, Barry Harris wanted me to tell you he wrote that song, "I Got a Problem." And there wasn't really even much reaction because I gave just that much time that I timed it right to where Buddy Guy went right on stage. He didn't even respond. But anyway, I didn't want to start something, on this moment of meeting Buddy Guy and everything's going right and talking to him and everything. for this brief amount of time, I didn't want to kill it by saying, hey, you know, the guy that you think wrote your song didn't really write your song, because that would have been like right there. It would be like probably like, hey man, see you later. But I promised Barry I would do it, so I did it. Barry was a hoot, man. I mean, we would take him, you know, at the time I was, like I said, I was 23. I stayed out in Wichita for 6 years. So, you know, all through my 20s, I hung out with this cat. And on beyond that, you know, even when I moved back to North Carolina, I still kept in contact with him. But my bass player, Jesse Major, who was about the same age, and a guy named Kyle Couch, my drummer, you know, I had them as a rhythm section, and we would sit here and I would take Barry out. You know, he would want to go out and play, you know, and so what I basically do is take him out and play, and have him play in the band and feature him, you know, Matt Walsh and his band with Barry Harris, and make a big deal, you know, when he come out, I'd introduce him, we'd play a couple of songs, you know, and everything, play, you know, 5 or 6 songs, and then bring Barry out. We had so many funny experiences with Barry on the road. I mean, you got to figure, here's some 20-year-old guys, and I think Kyle's in his early 30s, with this 70-year-old blues guy running down the road in a van. And, I mean, the adventures never stopped. I mean, anything from Barry, the Blackstone Cherry cigars. I remember one night we were driving in the car, and he had Blackstone Cherry cigars just filling up the van. It was wintertime. I lit incense because it was so bad. And then, you know, everybody in the van's complaining about the cigar, then they're complaining about the incense. Not long after, we look back and Barry's under, you know, asleep in the van, and he's covered himself up with newspapers. I mean, it was crazy. Barry was like the life of the party. I'm telling you, we went and played one night in Oklahoma at this festival, and it was a band house we were staying. And Barry wanted to leave early and go find an open jam somewhere. So, you know, I'm driving him around. The band, you know, they go off and do stuff with their girlfriends and stuff. And I go off and I'm driving Barry around trying to find this open jam, which we eventually find. But there's so many damn people in there. It's like, why even bother hanging out here? You know what I'm saying? So we just go back to the band house and hang out, you know, and you know, hang out, play guitars, do whatever. Well, it got to be about, you know, bedtime. And so we decided to go ahead and crash. We had a gig the next day. It was about, 11:30, midnight, something like that. Well, I hadn't been asleep for more than probably an hour, I guess. And I kept hearing, we shared the band house with some other band. And the next thing I know, you know, there's all this yelling and guitars and the band's going out in the damn living room, the whole thing. And I'm thinking, man, you know, Barry's in here. I wasn't really thinking about myself. I was thinking, Barry, you know, he's in his 70s. The man needs his rest. You know, he's pushing himself as is, I kind of felt like. But he was, you know, he wanted to do it. Hey, who's going to stop him? And so anyway, I finally got up to kind of go out there and basically say, hey, shut the hell up, you know. And I'll be damned if the guy that's not leading the band and the whole party is Barry. You guessed it. One night we were playing at a club and took a break, and the club had a big dance floor, and you know, they were playing some stupid, you know, 70s music or something during the break. Well, I can't find Barry anywhere. You know, I'm like, where is Barry? Where is he? It's time to start the set, you know. I'm like, well, we'll just go on without him, I guess. You know, we looked around, went outside, went to the club next door, couldn't find him anywhere. Well, they were out there doing that song was on The Love Train. People around the world, get on board, Love Train, you know, all that stuff. So the audience had formed a line of people, and they were doing the Love Train, going in a circle, kind of like a snake almost. And we're sitting on stage waiting for the song to stop, and lo and behold, guess who's at the end of the Love Train? Barry. He starts waving at us on the bandstand. So many funny things about Barry. I mean, he would tell you so many wild things. He used to say, when
when I chew some steak, what I do is chew it in my mouth. You chew that steak and chew it up real good and let all the moisture, the nutrients and stuff get out and you take all that moisture down and then you spit the steak out. Spit the steak out. So you do the same thing for water. Do the same thing for water. You take a drink of water, you swish it around your mouth, get all the minerals, and spit it out. That's how you get nutrients.
And he'd say crazy stuff like that. And, you know, a lot of the times I would think to myself, he's just doing some crazy old man stuff. But not that per se, but a lot of the things that he told me I thought were crazy old man stuff really ended up being the truth. I mean, it really was. When I was young, I thought, you know, you couldn't tell me that 1950s and 40s blues and rockabilly and stuff, that was like my gospel, you know what I mean? And that's all I played. And I played original songs, you know, but they were in that kind of structure, that kind of format. And Barry always told me, he said, one day, he said, you're going to want to play your music, not blues, not this rockabilly stuff, but you're going to want to play your music. And I always thought, oh man, he doesn't really know what he's talking about. But he did. He really did know what he was talking about, because eventually I did want to play my own songs. And I was able to tell him that. Now, Pop, I ended up calling Barry Pop because a lot of our escapades reminded me of Fred Sanford and Lamont. And so I just started calling him Pop. And he would refer to me as son. That was another reason I called him Pop, because he always said son. And Barry basically just, I mean, he made me his son. He gave me his guitar. I mean, he just went on and on. But he could be such a contradiction at times. I'll never forget, Barry would always talk about like Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf and Little Walter and that kind of stuff. He'd say, "Oh man, that's old drunk music. You know, that's basically, you know, old rundown bar music. You know, that's what a bunch of drunks listen to." He felt like, you know, people like Louis Jordan, you know, Count Basie, that kind of stuff. He really thought that uptown stuff was where it was at. He kind of frowned on blues. And it was so funny because, you know, I was so into that kind of blues music, and he'd say, at the time there was a Muddy Waters documentary came on. And I said, Pop, I said, you know, let's watch this documentary. I said, I'll come over. He said, come on over to the house, son. You know, I'm gonna record it, but come on over. We'll watch it together. And it was so funny, man, because halfway through this documentary, he just pops up. He said, God damn it, he said, Muddy Waters could sing his ass off. Muddy Waters was a hell of a singer, hell of a musician. And like, this is the same guy that would be telling me, you know, about 2 weeks later, I go over his house. I remember he was mad at something. His grandchildren were driving him crazy or something. Somebody was driving him crazy. And he was mad as hell, crotchety. And I went over, I said something about, made a mistake about saying something about Howlin' Wolf, I think. And he just said, God damn it, I'm so goddamn sick of hearing about Howlin' Wolf and Muddy fucking Water. I don't give a fuck about no goddamn Muddy Water. Fuck that shit. And I just sit there kind of like, you know, what do you say? What do you do? But I mean, I tell you one thing about Barry. He would always write his songs, and they might be blues in the blues format, but he would write them. And every time I saw him play guitar live, he never sounded the same. He called it stretching out. He'd say, you know, how'd it sound tonight? I didn't sound the same as last time. Stretching out. and really he would. I mean, he would very much stretch out. And it was just, nobody could one up Barry either. I think Duke Robillard came to town one time, and you know, I said, hey Barry, I said, you know, Duke Robillard's going to be out at the Roadhouse, the old Coyote Club. This was a club we go out to a lot of times. Barry drove a big white Cadillac, and on Thursday nights we go out to the Coyote Club and they had an open jam out there. We go out there and drink a couple of drinks and hang out and play. And I never forget one time, what was it? Crack Killed Applejack was the song that Barry was playing in the Cadillac one summer night.
He said, you gotta hear this song. Crack killed Applejack.
And it was just some kind of low budget rap song about crack killing this guy named Applejack. But anyway, Duke Robillard came to town, and I said, Barry, let's go out there and see Duke Robillard.
Well, okay, he thought, well, Duke Robillard, he ain't that big a guy,
He was already, comparing himself to Duke Robillard before we even went to the place. And we got up there and to the club, started watching him play. And I said, after the show, I can't remember how I said on the way home, but it launched him into a tirade. I said, Duke, he sounded really good or something. He said,
yeah, he sound good, but he can't play what I play. He can't play like I play.
And he went on to tell me that, and it was, and I mean, this is one of these things where you kind of question, like, is he just being, old crazy old man stuff, or is this, he had a point, come to find out later when I thought it through. He said, it didn't matter what Duke Robillard played or how good Duke Robillard played. He can't play what I play. When I touch the neck of a guitar and the way my hands hit the strings, no matter what he does, he can't play like I play. And he was right. I mean, you can't argue with that. You really can't.
He can't play what I play. He good, but he can't play what I play.
Now, next time, you might want to use that. That might be something you could pull out there. Me and Barry, man, I tell you, and we were like Fred and Lamont too, because our relationship did evolve into not being shy to get in an argument with each other. And there were many times that we, went at each other's throats. I'll never forget one night we played in Kansas City, Missouri. And, I gave Barry this crate amplifier. He loved it. He loved this amplifier. And it had a distortion switch on it. And he'd be playing beautifully, but every once in a while he'd hit that distortion switch and it'd just go completely haywire because the volume would go down. And it just, and I can't remember what I told him this night, but I said something about the distortion switch or something. And he got mad during the set, when he hit it. So we're playing for like 100 people or so. And I didn't want him to lose his volume. I didn't want it to fade out, And anyway, he got mad because he had a little bit of whiskey in him before the gig. But I guess it was the first set. He got mad when I said something about that distortion button. Put his damn guitar into the stand and walked out the door and left us in front of these people playing. Well, when the gig was over, we drove back to Wichita and argued with each other for 3 hours. He got so mad, he was drunk. I was driving his van, he was kicking the dash with his shoes. He was so damn mad at me. And, I think he just got drunk and just, had a bad night. It happens, right? So I wasn't even living in Wichita at the time. I had moved back to North Carolina. This is when I was driving out there during I was on a tour. And so we didn't talk for about 3 months. And then I decided, well, I need to call the old man and make up. And, when he answered the phone, it was like nothing even happened. But somewhere in that conversation, he stopped and said, well, he said, I ain't going to go into what happened 3 months ago. But you was wrong, son, don't you? You was wrong. And I just said, yeah, I do. I was wrong, Pop. You're right. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Because, why not? Barry was such a hoot, man. I mean, this is just believe me, this is just an introductory episode about him. There will be a lot more to come about the adventures I had with this man. And I flew him out here to North Carolina for a while. Those made for some funny stories. We did a blues festival in Manteo, North Carolina. And Barry met Hubert Sumlin for like the second time ever. And apparently Barry had gone to this festival, and he went like every year that the festival was around. It was called the Dusk Till Dawn Festival in Rentiesville, Oklahoma. And I guess back in the early 80s or sometime around then when he was there, he was at the hotel room where he was staying, and he was playing guitar, he said, sitting on his bed with a couple other guys, and had the door open, and Hubert Sumlin walked by because he was playing the Dusk Till Dawn Festival as well. And he walked by and heard Barry playing, and they ended up making friends. And Hubert brought his amp over, and they just kind of basically hung out the whole afternoon into the evening until it was time to go to the festival and do the gig, playing guitars and hanging out. So believe it or not, when Barry saw Hubert at this festival, Hubert remembered him, and they called up again. And I got some photos of that. I'll include into this episode. But anyway, just a fantastic guy. Barry was. He was inducted into the Oklahoma Hall of Fame, and I think he's also in the Kansas Hall of Fame as well. But I'll have to check out that to make sure. But just a fantastic musician, and very much missed. Very much missed. He was a colorful character, and I tell you, there wasn't a place that you could go to that Barry didn't leave and everybody knew who he was. I mean, if we went to McDonald's, by the time we left, everybody knew that his name was Barry Harris and that he was from Wichita, Kansas, and he was a guitar player. I'll never forget one time me and Barry and his wife Loretta went to the bank, and Barry had to settle up something at the bank. I don't know what it was. But me and Loretta and I sat out in the car and waited on him. And he was in there about 20 minutes or so, and he comes back out, and I thought, God, finally we're getting to leave.
He said, son, get out the car, come on in here with me.
I said, why?
He said, come on in here, I got something I need you to do, help me with.
And so I go into the bank, and I go over to the teller's desk, or associate's desk that's helping Barry. And he says,
this guy I tell you about, this Matt Walsh, he a guitar player too. See, we're guitar players.
And that's all he wanted, was just to introduce, to let her know that we were guitar players and whatever else. And just some funny stuff. I mean, he'd get up every single morning and go to McDonald's. And there were all these other old guys there that he would meet with at McDonald's every morning. And the times I would go to that McDonald's, I mean, it was more like a comedy house than a McDonald's. I mean, there were such characters in there, these old guys that would get around in the mornings and hang out. It was hilarious. And tell stories and all kinds of crazy stuff. I mean, it just on and on and on. Well, one more story about Barry before we go. When I did bring him down here from North Carolina, he had a friend that I think was in the army at the same time as he was. They kind of knew each other briefly in the army, but they kept in touch for some 40 some odd years or so, maybe longer than that. And they would write to each other and send books to each other. And the guy's name was, I want to say it was Joe, I want to say Joe Hill. We'll just use that for lack of a better word. I might think of the guy's last name before we end. But anyway, so Barry was going to reunite with this guy because he lived in Rock Hill, South Carolina, which isn't far from where I was living at the time, in Statesville, North Carolina. It's about an hour away. And they were going to go to church together on a Sunday. Well, we get to Rock Hill, and I go to the address where I thought this church was, and just to show you how old timey Barry was, he saw it. We weren't really sure if it was the church or not, but this lady's like walking up the street on the sidewalk. We got the van pulled over, and he starts rolling down the window. I knew what he was going to do because I knew him like the back of my hand. We spent so much time together. And he says, rolls down the window and just starts yelling at this woman, Hey, you know Joe Hill?
You know Joe Hill? Do you know Joe Hill?
Anyway, folks, if you made it this far, thank you for tuning in to Shiloh Saloon Stories. We'll be back with another episode soon.